and then we'll get those to our moderator, and we will then hope to get to your questions. So now it is my complete pleasure to introduce our moderator today, which is former Secretary of Energy and Environment, Mike Teague. He also serves on our board, and it is just a delight to get to work with Mike. Mike serves as the Vice President of Government Relations for ONEO. He leads the team in engaging at federal, tribal, state, and local levels, drawing on his service as a cabinet level state government, as well as from 28 years career in the U.S. Army as Oklahoma's first Secretary of both Energy and Environment. Mike became highly respected by parties across traditional political and development divides as he led the state's response to the sudden increase in earthquakes. His approach of bringing stakeholders together to solve contentious issues collaboratively have been used successfully with a variety of and local communities. Domestic experience in energy and environment solutions from his nearly 3-decade-long active duty in the Army and an Army career. Before retiring from the rank of colonel, Mike commanded the Tulsa District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers from 2010 to 2013, where he facilitated and negotiated numerous solutions among federal and state agencies, Native American tribes, and local stakeholders. Mike holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Norwich University, where he serves on the board of fellows and master's degrees in operations analysis from the Naval Postgraduate School, and is in the National Security and Strategic Studies from the Naval War College. Wow. Let's welcome Mike Teague.
Every time we do an event, I ask Corey to shorten that bio. She hasn't done it yet. Tim's going to say the same thing. I'm going to read his bio. Sure. I'll do your bio first, and then we can get into the questions and the conversation. Before I start that, though, it's really cool that you have the two of us sitting up here in this building. And so the Secretary of Energy at the time, when GE was trying to figure out where globally they wanted to put their research center, was Mike Main. And Mike convinced GE to put that building in Oklahoma City. And then GE hired Mike away from the governor to build and run the building, which is how she then combined energy and environment into one cabinet position. And Mike Teague got a job. And then 2 secretaries later, Secretary MqQueen is sitting here as the Secretary of Energy and Environment. So it all does connect back to Mike Main recruiting GE. So Ken MqQueen serves as the Oklahoma Secretary of Energy and Environment. He was appointed in 2022 by Governor Stitt. In this role, he was responsible for 36 state agencies, boards, compacts, and commissions, as well as advancing policies that encourage economic growth. Before his appointment, he co-served as U.S. EPA Region 6 Administrator, in Dallas, and U.S. EPA National Energy Policy Advisor. He was the first and only native-born Oklahoman to serve as a regional administrator at EPA. Before federal service, he was New Mexico's Cabinet Secretary for Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources, and NERD. Industry experience spanned 35 years as a petroleum engineer, retiring as an asset team vice president for a major upstream energy company in 2016. His academic background includes serving as a petroleum engineering adjunct professor at the University of Tulsa and guest lecturer at other colleges and universities. In addition to teaching, Mr. MqQueen consults on a wide array of natural resource issues with particular focus on water use, reuse, the hydrogen economy, helium, oil and gas, electrical generation, and carbon sequestration, which might be your current favorite topic. Secretary MqQueen graduated from the University of Tulsa with a BS in petroleum engineering and currently serves on TU's Industry Advisory Board and is a high school graduate of Davis Public Schools in South Central Oklahoma. So, Secretary, welcome.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be with you.
I really do want to start with appreciating hosting this event in Oklahoma City. And one of the things that I don't think has changed is yesterday you went from Tulsa to Shoto to Oklahoma City. Did you get home last night? Home last night, back down the turnpike today. So that is kind of the life of the secretary, and that has not changed in 10 years. So beyond the bios that Corey just refuses to shorten, what else is on there? Can you explain to everybody, or share everybody, family and how a kid from Davis High School ends up as a secretary in Oklahoma?
If I had had any idea that my second career would have been in government, I would have paid much closer attention to my ninth grade civics lesson. But I had a wonderful time as a petroleum engineer working in 12 different states across the U.S. and 3 different countries. And when I retired in 2016, I was fortunate to have good connections with the governor in New Mexico, and she had a vacancy in her cabinet and asked me to come down and do that. So it's a great opportunity for me when I talk to students today to encourage them not to focus necessarily entirely on the discipline that they're undertaking, but be open for new opportunities. And what I found is that my experience in business has been particularly helpful in the government realm, because people laugh when I say this. I've never thought of myself as a political person, even though I occupy a political position. I've always thought of myself more as a problem solver. That's from the engineering background. So I like to look for collaborative solutions among groups and get things done and move on down the road.
So you talked about New Mexico, and was the Emner position more of a regulator, or was the regulatory to separate agencies? Maybe I'll back that up. So you've gone from an energy position in New Mexico to an environmental position at the federal level to now both energy and environmental promise. So how do those 3 help change you, or maybe prepare you for where you are today, doing both energy and environment?
Well, it was a good progression because basically all of my industrial career was energy, and that was my primary responsibility in New Mexico. We did oversee regulatory activities under the cabinet in New Mexico. There's actually 5 separate divisions. So I had oil and gas, mining, forestry, state parks, and energy conservation. And in my work in New Mexico, we ended up doing a lot of work with EPA and water issues. And that's really how I got acquainted with EPA. And I think that's what really led to my ultimate appointment to regional administrator in Dallas, because I was a well-known quantity of work closely with EPA. The Dallas venture was really a full court press on learning about all the environmental issues. I had some exposure to that in New Mexico, but certainly that was the full focus in Dallas. And so coming to Oklahoma, I think I have a good background both from the energy side, from industry and New Mexico, and then of course a strong education from EPA on the environment side. So it was really a nice background to combine those 2 areas of expertise to serve governorship here in Oklahoma.
So you talked about how New Mexico was organized with the 5 divisions. In the bio, it says 36 agencies, boards, compacts, and commissions. So how are those 36? I mean, part of this job really is about herding cats, right? So what are some of the agencies that fall underneath the Secretary of Energy and Environment here in Oklahoma?
The major agencies underneath our umbrella would be ones that you all are well familiar with. So we would be Department of Environmental Quality, Oklahoma Water Resources Board, Oklahoma Mining Commission, the Oklahoma Corporation. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple of them. GRDA is another one. I was at GRDA yesterday in Shoto.
And it does get all lumped together as energy and environment, but every single one of those agencies has different statutory authority, some are very small, some are very large. But you're really about watching the leadership and the policies across all of them?
That's probably a good way to think about it. Some of our agencies, like DEQ in particular, has 4 or 5 councils, advisory commissions that sit underneath them. So we play an active part in making sure that those groups are fully staffed, because their job is to really contemplate and explore rule changes that are currently being discussed at the agencies, and then those are eventually floated up to the EQB, which is a regulatory board for the DEQ. So it's a great opportunity for in that role for many of our citizens to have direct input into environmental considerations that eventually lead to real adoption in Oklahoma.
And so the other piece of the common thing I would say across all states, and we both had the opportunity to go to ECOS. ECOS is the Environmental Council of States, so it's all the environmental directors across the country. And the very first time I went into a meeting, the DEQ director from Massachusetts is sitting next to the TCEQ chairman from Texas. And the politics of those two in their states could not have been more different. And they were both sitting there fussing that their agencies didn't have enough funding to do all the things that the legislature keeps asking them to do. So one of the things, and I'm definitely setting you up for the answer to this question, but one of the things that to me is most interesting is your responsibilities are both energy and environment. So how much money does the legislature give you to do your job?
Many people are quite surprised to learn that we're a non-appropriated agency. Our cabinet is non-appropriated, so that means we get $0 from the state legislature. We have several sources of funds our cabinet. One is a very small production tax that's generated from oil revenue. Our office statutorily is set up as the Oklahoma Interstate Oil Compact Commission. And it's that funding that we use to generate the operational funds in our office. When Governor Fallon combined environment and energy, then we had some additional sources of funds that are flowing from the environment side, including the natural resource trustee funds that are available for us to deploy for environmental remediation across the state. But, as a taxpayer, I don't have to worry that, I'm relying on the legislature to fund our department. So we're entirely independent of that process.
So that's really important in the first week of May, when the legislature's over there arguing about what the state budget's going to look like, that you don't have to be in those conversations. And in fact, you're probably best if you keep your head out of those conversations. So I did always appreciate that. But you have some other stuff going on in the legislature right now. And so what were kind of your priorities this year with the legislature in 2024 and maybe look towards what's in the future?
I might back up to last year, because a lot of what we're doing this year is based on what we did last year. But since I came on board in 2022, carbon sequestration has been one of our big focuses. Last legislative session, there was a bill that was ran that asked our office to look at the statutory framework for carbon sequestration in Oklahoma, with the thinking that we would ultimately seek program delegation from EPA. So many of you may know that we have 3 major environmental federal laws here in the U.S. We have the Clean Air Act, we have the Clean Water Act, and we have the Safe Drinking Water Act. Each of those acts allow states to take on some or all of the program. That's called program delegation, or what's often called primacy. Carbon sequestration is regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and in the SDWA, there are 6 different classes of injection wells. You have to have a permit for each one of these types, depending on what material is going downhole. So oil and gas operations typically utilize the class 2 injection wells. Oklahoma, either through the Corporation Commission or the DEQ, currently has primacy for classes 1 through 5. We do not have primacy for class 6, and class 6 is what's used for carbon sequestration. So this study that how the statutory framework sits, we actually have a carbon sequestration act for Oklahoma that was adopted in 2009. But as you can imagine, a lot has changed since then. So this review that we did for the legislature last year suggested changes in the statutory framework so that we would be better equipped to move to program delegation. So this session, we have two bills running related to those statutory changes for carbon sequestration. June of next year, we would be ready to send our program delegation application to EPA. So that's taken a lot of focus on our behalf. We've had a working group that's basically met every 2 weeks since I've come on board. We're looking at both the challenges of program delegation and rule requirements to effectively have a good carbon sequestration program. Getting a little bit of feedback there. In addition, Mike, you'll be happy to know that this year we're running a bill for our seismic network. So you'll know back in 2015 we kind of reached a high of seismic activity in Oklahoma, and through your efforts, we're seeing just a fraction of the numbers of earthquakes that we saw back then. But the network that was put together back then relied on a lot of borrowed equipment, particularly from the feds and from some universities. That equipment is getting old at this point. Some of the loaners want their equipment back. And there's been some technological advancements that have been made with regard to the seismic detection equipment. So we do have a bill running this session asking for a one-time $4 million expenditure so that we can replace and upgrade a lot of our seismic monitoring in the state.
So what I hear, even the prep that you just talked about around carbon sequestration, there were some states that jumped immediately to class 6 and they want a delegation from EPA. But, and I won't throw rocks at those states as much, but you really have done the prep work to build the foundation for what that application could look like. I mean, it's much more long-term than what normally happens, and certainly what happens over at the Capitol. And even the funding on the seismicity review is, you're looking much more long-term. Legislators have a hard time doing that. It's a 2-year cycle, it's a 4-year cycle, it's really a 1-year state session. They're all focused on how are we going to finish everything we got to do by the end of May. But the idea that somebody could be in an agency or a cabinet position and give the state that strategic depth, right? Of just, hey, we should fix the seismic network now because we might need that in the future, just doesn't happen outside of an office like yours. So that really is a compliment to you and your team.
No, Mike, I think you're exactly right. That most legislators are not thinking past the next election. So they're very focused, and this year is an election year, so their outlook will be different than what it would have been last year when it wasn't an election year. So you kind of have to take all that into the calculus of determining how to move forward with bills in the legislature. But my personal viewpoint always has been have a strategic outlook and look at the long-term view, because that's what really is going to benefit the citizens of Oklahoma.
So I'm going to switch topics a little bit over to renewable energy. And it's interesting, one of the agencies as part of your cabinet is OERB, and so the big hard hat pillar over here. The Oklahoma Energy Resources Board, most folks don't understand, is funded by the oil and gas industry to clean up old well sites. And as I was coming out of Tulsa this morning, the OERB billboard out there says Oklahoma sustainable, reliable, So your office really, as much as you're funded significantly from the oil and gas industry, your office really does have the approach of all the above. And so can you talk a little bit about wind, solar, renewables across the state?
Governor Stitt has made it very clear that his policy on energy is an all of the above policy. In fact, not only all of the above, but more of the above. If we look at electricity in particular, well, let's talk first about our historical perspective. You know, Oklahoma has been an oil and gas producing state since before it was a state. You know, the first productive oil wells were drilled in Oklahoma in the late 1800s. We're the only state capital in the union that has an active oil and gas field located on its campus. When you visit our state capital, the oil derricks there are unmistakable. So that's an important part of our history. But today, oil production in Oklahoma is about 400,000 barrels per day. That puts us in about the number 6 spot among producers in the state. By comparison, Texas, which obviously has a geographic advantage, produces about 5.5 million barrels of oil, followed by New Mexico at about 1.8, followed by North Dakota, which is roughly 1 million barrels. But today in total, oil and gas production is about 13 million barrels. So we've really put a dent in the need to import crude oil from foreign countries, which really speaks strongly to our national security issue. But on the renewable front, and particularly in electrical generation, I think many people are surprised to learn that Oklahoma is actually a leader in this field. Today, Oklahoma is the 3rd largest generator of wind energy in the United States. And in 2022 was the first year in the entire history of Oklahoma that wind generated electricity produced a larger percentage than did natural gas electricity. In 2002, somewhere between 60 and 70% of Oklahoma electricity was generated by coal. Last year, that was down to 8%. We have 6 remaining coal plants left in Oklahoma. So from an environmental or emission standpoint, the important thing to know there is for every kilowatt of electricity that's generated by coal, that same kilowatt that's generated by natural gas emits only 50% of the emissions. So the two things that have happened in Oklahoma generation is both a replacement of the coal with wind and with natural gas, and those two combined has seen about a 60% reduction in carbon intensity in our fuel sources for electrical generation from 2002 to today. So that's a pretty significant reduction. Not many states are able to claim that. Now, there's some interesting things going on. The big question in everyone's mind is how far can renewables penetrate into the overall context of electrical generation before reliability is potentially impacted. So Oklahoma ranks number 4 in the percentage of wind generation that's done as a percentage of our total. Iowa is actually number 1. They decreased a little bit in 2023, but in 2022, 2023, Iowa's actually gotten to 60 or 61% of their total generation from wind. So the challenge that we see with wind, in fact, with wind and solar, is the intermittent sources. So we've got to have technology in place to make sure that we have sufficient electrical supply when the wind doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. So in Oklahoma, wind has far outpaced solar. In fact, if you look at the numbers, solar or photovoltaic generation is less than 1% of our total generation in Oklahoma. I think that's going to change. If we look at projections for the next 5 years, we have several large solar plants that are going to come online in Oklahoma. And so I expect solar to be catching up with wind on the percentage basis. I think part of the reason that wind got an early start in Oklahoma, there's really two reasons. First of all, we've got some of the best wind assets in the world. The Great Plains have always been a windy place, and you can't find a better place to put up turbines. But the other advantage that wind has is a lot of the area in western Oklahoma that's being utilized for generation is also used for agricultural production. And the advantage of the footprint of wind is it takes up very little farmland so that you can continue to grow crops or run cattle in and around wind generation. And so that's a real positive. The other interesting thing, and I haven't fully dug to the bottom of this yet, but in 2023, total wind generation in the United States was down 2.1% from 2022. And I'm speculating on what the causes were, but I think part of that is transmission congestion. But I think the largest part is 2023 was actually a less windy year than 2022 overall. And so that could lead to a whole number of discussions on what might be the potential sources of that. But in Oklahoma, we honestly are transmission challenged. So most of our renewable assets are located in western half of the state. Most of our load and our interconnect points are located in the eastern part of the state. So to better utilize the renewable sources, I think we're gonna have to have additional transmission from the west to the east. And there's several big projects that are on the board right now that could really help with that development.
So you talked about what we need now, and I agree with you from all the above, right? Because if you think about all the different pieces, every one of them has an Achilles, right? If it's
no free lunch.
There is not. So if it's, coal, huge emissions problems, and natural gas, much less, but still an emissions problem, which is why your work on carbon capture is so important. If it's wind and solar, it's the transmission piece and the intermittency. And so, again, it sounds like you've got some projects on the board working on that. What else is out there on the future? And I'm kind of leading this towards hydrogen because I know you've done so much work in that area. So where do we stand? Recognize the hydrogen hub political decision went someplace else. But the state's still working on hydrogen, right?
We are, and just as a final thought on the electrical generation, when we rely heavily on renewables, and that is when our generation mix gets above 50%, we have to have a reliable backup. And for Oklahoma today, that means either natural gas peakers or batteries. Those are really our two realistic alternatives to back up our renewables. Longer term, I mean, we probably need to differentiate between this idea of what renewables and then what carbon free is, because as I try to connect all the dots, I think on a go forward basis that nuclear is going to have to be a part of the overall. We just have to have that reliable baseload generation capacity. And I think with the advent of the SMRs that are just beginning to be rolled out here, it may offer a real opportunity for business to move forward. So with hydrogen, when people think about hydrogen, there's three primary uses of hydrogen that comes to mind. One is electrical generation, one is fertilizer manufacture, and the third is transportation fuel. So there's been a lot of interest in electrical generation for hydrogen. The biggest single challenge with that today is it's really not cost effective. But the OEMs that are building natural gas turbines today, that would be Mitsubishi, Siemens, GE, all have machines that they're rolling out today that can utilize as much as 30% hydrogen mix with methane, and they have the goal of moving that up to 100% hydrogen. So from a generation standpoint, certainly manufacturers are cognizant about being ready to utilize hydrogen in the future. From an emission standpoint, this is something I find particularly fascinating, is that if you take a small amount of hydrogen, say 5 to 15% of the total fuel stream, and mix that with methane for combustion in a turbine, your emission profile is actually disproportionately reduced. So you get a better bang for the buck than what you would using just methane by itself. And the reason for that, I use the analogy, it's, you know, you have a bucket of diesel, you can throw a match in it and not much happens. But if you mix some gasoline with that diesel, then you get an immediate ignition. And that's the same way when you mix a little bit of hydrogen with methane, you get a much better and more complete burn in the turbine. And so you're generating far less emissions. As I look at those three options for expediting the use of hydrogen, I think probably the most near-term one is in the transportation sector. And the reason I say that, let me just give a little background here, is Oklahoma City and Tulsa today both sit on the razor thin edge of being deemed in non-attainment.
Ozone, right?
Ozone PM 2.5. So having a non-attainment designation is like putting a lead balloon around your neck and trying to swim the English Channel. You know, it's a huge impediment, because any new businesses that are looking at your state, one of the boxes they look at is, are you an attainment or non-attainment area? Because if you're locating a business that emits in a non-attainment area, you've got to have more expensive controls in place to address your emissions. So we are very focused in Oklahoma to making sure that we stay in non-attainment. And today, the entire state is in a non-attainment status, and there's not many states that can make that claim. Going forward, we've got two challenges. The first challenge is population is growing, more and more automobiles, more and more trucks on the road, generating more and more emissions. The second challenge is that EPA every 5 years has to evaluate the 6 criteria air pollutants, and they have the option to address or to change those levels. And currently, the EPA is considering taking comments on reducing PM 2.5, particulate matter 2.5, which is particularly prevalent from diesel exhaust, and reducing that by 25%. So that's a significant reduction. That one rule change would likely place Tulsa in a non-attainment status. So the question is, how do we, what's the low-hanging fruit we might pursue in looking at improving air quality from our transportation sector? And we think that's a role for hydrogen to play. EPA just recently made available some CPRG grants, climate pollution reduction grants. Those are primarily focused at greenhouse gas reductions. Oklahoma has applied for one of those. And then we've joined 4 other states in 4 other joint applications. But our focus is at least in part, looking at establishing fueling stations and buying some hydrogen fuel trucks to put on the road to see how this technology works. And the way we see this evolving is first focusing on our metropolitan areas. So we could put fueling stations in Oklahoma City and Tulsa where we have trucks that come and go every day from the central side and can be easily refueled. Once we build that demand for hydrogen in our metropolitan areas, then we can look at establishing fueling stations along the interstates. And the heavy haul trucks are really the target here for working on big emission reductions. So Oklahoma is currently leading an effort. I hope we're going to be successful, but you'll appreciate the complexities here, that we're putting together an MOU of the 8 states that share Interstate 40. So that's from California all the way to North Carolina. And as you think about those states along the way, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, you know, those states have pretty radically different views on a lot of things, including approaches to environment. So we're trying to focus this particular agenda on improvement of air quality all along those states. And the reason we're focused on I-40, first of all, for Oklahoma, that's our only east-west corridor. But more significantly, virtually all of the imports that are arriving on the California coast from Asia are loaded onto trucks and are transported across the U.S. And if you look at the heat maps of truck traffic moving across the U.S., it's pretty consistent until you get to Oklahoma, and then there's about a 50-50 split that goes on east, and then the rest goes up 44 to St. Louis and Chicago. So in order to address the non-I-40 part of the CPRG, we partnered with Arkansas as a bolt-on opportunity to the I-40 corridor, and it will address I-44 and US 412 into Arkansas to try to pick up all of the truck traffic that's generated out of Northwest Arkansas. So that's our immediate approach on hydrogen. As Mike alluded to, we were not successful for the hydrogen hub. We could spend an hour talking about that, but we were in good company because other than Texas, there were no states selected in the Southwest, the South Central, or the Southeast part of the U.S.
Or red states. The same. I get to say that. You have to be nice. So you hit the questions that I kind of came in with, and we've got several that have come in, and I think we got 5, 6, a little bit longer. Okay. I don't know, I feel like the first 2 questions, you may punt these over me. The first 2 questions about earthquakes. Merry Christmas. Considering the hundreds of faults in Oklahoma's geology in recent earthquakes, how can you ensure that CCS will not trigger more quakes or put pressure on vulnerable well casings?
That's a great question, because what we've determined over the last decade is about 95, 96% of earthquake activity in Oklahoma is attributable to wastewater disposal. The other small percentage is attributable to hydraulic stimulation wells. Those are kind of 2 separate issues. But part of our initiative for funding the upgrades in the seismic network were specifically intended to be able to fully address induced seismicity with any potential injectivity from CO2. So I think what we've learned from the wastewater issue is, first of all, we can't be utilizing zones that sit on top of the basement faults for carbon sequestration. So we're going to have to be uphole or shallow looking for zones for the carbon sequestration. So I think we've learned a lot in the last decade, and we've been fairly effective. Our earthquake activity is about 10% of what it was in 2015, and the magnitude overall has gone down as well. So I think we're using those learnings that we picked up with water to apply to CO2, because a lot of the principles are the same.
Yeah, you touched on the second question, which is most of the seismic activity is created by wastewater injection wells. And the question is there any movement to abandon practice? Can maybe explain a little bit more why we use disposal wells? Not just for oil and gas, but for class 1 and everything else.
Well, subsurface disposal of all sorts of materials has provided with one of the most cost-effective and long-term storage mechanisms that we have available. The reality is today we do not have the technology available to economically purify oil and gas wastewater. So as long as we have oil and gas production, we've got to have a mechanism for disposing of the waste. Historically, that's not been an issue and problem in Oklahoma. It only became a problem starting about 2010, and that was related to the zone that was chosen for wastewater injection. There are active research going on, both Texas and New Mexico have established research consortiums to look at beneficial use from oil and gas wastewater. Of late, a lot of people have been looking for lithium in wastewater as a potential use of that. I think long term, particularly eastern Oklahoma, water is not a big challenge, but as you get west of the 100th meridian, water becomes a big challenge. In New Mexico, that's why it's a big focus for us. Average rainfall on a good year in New Mexico is 14 inches compared to 36 or 38 in Tulsa. It's even less in Utah and Nevada. So those states are really looking for creative ways to both conserve the freshwater resources they have and utilize other brine water resources they have. So I think that's an area that we really need some additional smart thinking in and technological development. So I do think there's an opportunity to ultimately reuse some of the wastewater we currently generate, particularly in some industrial applications.
So he's being pretty modest because the person who started all the efforts in New Mexico to look at reuse to produce water is Ken. I appreciate that too. As a water guy, I appreciate that. Couple questions more about renewable energy. So the first one is there movement for wind energy to reach individual households similar to solar? So I assume that's talking about microturbines. And then the second one is about wind turbines as well. And it's what work is being done regarding the disposal of the big wind turbines at their end of life. I know we've got some stuff in place legislatively about decommissioning, and that those costs are borne by the companies, not by the state taxpayers. But maybe on either micro wind or disposal of wind turbines.
Well, micro wind is nothing new. In the 20s and 30s, a lot of farmers had small wind generators on their house, and they used that so they could listen to the radio. This was before we had co-ops running power lines out to our farming communities. I think it has local application. One of the challenges is going to be zoning requirements. If you're in a metropolitan area, you may have some significant challenges to overcome about erecting a wind turbine in your backyard. If you're out in a rural area, that's probably going to be less of a challenge. From an efficiency and cost standpoint, though, I really think it's more beneficial to use the large wind farms that are being built today. The turbines that are being deployed today will generate about 3.3 megawatts each. Those are significant upside generators from where we first started. And so when you look at the cost of generating that power, certainly economies of scale is a big factor. So I really think from a cost perspective, we're better served by utilizing the larger wind farms and transmission systems that's available to us. Now, solar, on the other hand, I think does have application for individual homes and probably a much less of a threat from an optics or regulatory zoning issue. And your second question was?
Disposal of wind turbines.
Big problem. We don't have a good solution yet. Texas, which leads the nation in wind generation, also leads the nation in piles of old turbine blades that are literally just being stacked at various locations. It's another great technological challenge that needs to be solved. If any of you figure out a good solution for wind turbine blades, you could make a lot of money. I think States also have to be aware of having sufficient financial assurance in place for wind projects. We've learned some important lessons about having financial assurance in place from the oil and gas industry, and so I think, going forward, when the wind turbines are done, we need to make sure we have regulations in place that restores the land to what it looked like before the activity.
I know we are getting a little bit short on time, so this last question is probably pretty broad. Where do you see the state of Oklahoma going in the next 3 to 5 years in terms of sustainability?
I think in the electrical generation area, you will continue to see some carrots and some sticks that move us to more sustainable regulations. EPA just issued a whole array of emission requirements that have to be met by power plants, some fairly soon. That's the stick approach. But I do think that from a sustainability and power generation, we are going to see a movement to lower carbon electrical generation as we move toward 2040 and 2050. In the transportation realm, I'm really hopeful that our advocacy for hydrogen and heavy haul trucks will be impactful in improving air quality. I'm really hopeful that before this administration leaves, that we can actually see some fruits of our labor in that regard and have some hydrogen trucks on the road. And what I will say about hydrogen trucks is that there's a big difference of efficiency in hydrogen trucks. There's a big debate going on in hydrogen transportation today of whether you're better off using gaseous hydrogen or liquid hydrogen. There's also the debate of whether you use internal combustion engines or whether you use fuel cells. My bias, having had some involvement in this, is long term. I think we're going to end up with liquid fuel cell vehicles working in heavy truck transportation. The reason for that is you take a gallon of gaseous hydrogen and a gallon of liquid hydrogen, you can get about 10 times the BTUs in the liquid hydrogen. So that allows you the capability of getting much farther down the road before you have to use fuel. The other consideration is for gaseous hydrogen, you need to, in order to get enough hydrogen on board to be effective, have pressures, approaching 10,000 psi. So you basically have these welding bottles on board with this high pressure hydrogen to get enough on board to get between fueling stops. So eventually, I think we're going to end up with fuel cell vehicles. Once we establish a reliable fueling network for heavy haul trucks, then I think what will follow is personal vehicle hydrogen vehicles. But I don't think personal vehicles will really have a place until we have a very expanded, reliable network of fueling stations.
It'll be convenient for the average person to pick it up. I think we're going to finish up. So you're going to close out? All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate the time. Appreciate everything you're doing. I spent some time at the beginning of this talking about New Mexico and EPA, now Oklahoma, because it is pretty rare to find anybody that has served in this space or spaces, both energy and environment, in 2 different states and the federal government. So thanks for your service.
My pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
All right, thank you so much, Secretary McQueen. We so appreciate your time. And of course, Mike, former Secretary, we appreciate your time as well. Thank you. Very, very enlightening today. It was fantastic to hear where the state is going, where we're headed, and we're excited for all of those changes. So we do say thank you to everyone who has come today. On behalf of the Sustainability Alliance Board of Directors, thank you for joining us at our B2B Case for Sustainability series. If you could please take a moment to fill out the exit survey. It helps us adjust our programming as well, so we know what you liked and what you didn't. And what you think we can improve on. And a big thank you once again to our sponsors. Thank you to Secretary of Energy and Environment Ken McQueen and former Secretary Mike Teague as well. Now you can join us today and support the B2B memberships. They start at just $250 annually, and they come with free entry to all of our B2B events, all brand recognition on our website and event materials, and the ability to host booths like those that you see over here on the side today. And you can use the QR code on the screen right there to explore your membership options for organizations and, of course, for individuals. We'd love to have you if you're not with a business membership. We would love to have you as individuals as well. Every bit matters. And again, if you're interested in joining our scorecard program, we've had some really exciting additions to the scorecard program recently. Just message or talk to Morgan Fairley. She is behind the scenes back there. Or you can come by our booth after the event. We're going to be down there at the very end. And please join us once again Thursday, July 26th for the Scorecard Annual Celebration in Tulsa at the Philbrook Museum of Art. It's a fantastic place. If you've never been there, it's gorgeous. And we do have some gifts for the two of you for helping us today. We have a book. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass. The author is Robin Wall Kimmer, and it is a beautiful bestseller, national bestseller that tells a little bit about indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the teaching that plants have even to this day. So thank you very much, Secretary McQueen, and Mike, for you as well. I want a full book I want an Oprah book review. When you're done, let me know if I should get this one. Once again, thank you so much for attending. Thank you to our sponsors, and you are welcome to stick around. There are plenty of pastries and coffee left. And if you'd like to network or get to know any of us, please feel free to approach. And again, thank you so much for coming this afternoon.
Very, very enlightening. Thank you very much. And I never in my life would have thought about what happens when they're decommissioned.